They say a storm was coming the night I was born. Not one of rain or thunder, but of change. I didn't know it then, of course. I was just a baby in my mama's arms, wrapped in a scrap of linen beside the hearth, in a cabin smaller than most folks' chicken coops. But when I look back now, I think the wind must have known what I'd one day do. What I'd one day become. My name's Abigail. Born into bondage on a cotton plantation in the deep of Georgia, I never had a last name. At least not one I could claim. Folks on the outside called us by the names of our enslavers. But deep down, we all knew our true names, the ones whispered between mothers and daughters when no one else was listening. I was 10, the first time I understood what it meant to be owned. Up until then, the world was a mix of muddy feet, laughter stolen in the sugarcane, and songs hummed under breath. But that year, a boy named Eli, only a year older than me, tried to run. They caught him before sunrise. They made the rest of us watch. And afterward, nothing was ever quite the same. That morning, I clenched my fists so tight I felt my fingernails cut my palms. I didn't cry, not then. Not when the overseer's whip cracked the sky. Not when Eli's screams echoed off the trees like something dying. But that night, lying on the dirt floor beside my mama, I asked her why. She just held me close and whispered, "Because they scared baby. They scared of what we'd do if we ever stopped being scared of them." That line never left me. As I grew, I learned quiet things. How to walk without sound, how to hide words behind songs, how to listen without looking. And then I learned louder things. How to stitch a wound with a needle meant for cloth, how to pick locks, how to mix herbs until they became something more than healing. The plantation's White House sat high on a hill, watching over us like a warden. In it lived Master Whitlow, his wife Annalise, and their son Jonah, a boy with wild golden curls and fists that knew no consequences. I was assigned to the house at 14, said to be well-behaved, sharp, and clean enough to stand near polished floors. I didn't take it as a compliment. It was a sentence. My first task was simple: polish the silver. But I saw more than spoons. I saw maps, the way the halls twisted, the rhythm of the guards, which keys jingled on which belts. By the time I turned 16, I knew the house better than the people who built it. That's when I met Ruth. She was older than me, sharper in the eyes, softer in her step. She worked the kitchen, but her real skill wasn't cooking, it was knowing. Ruth had a way of understanding things before they were said. She took one look at me, smirked, and said, "You ain't just here to serve soup, are you?" I shook my head. "Good," she said, passing me a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside were dried roots, a copper key, and a scrap of parchment with names I didn't recognize. "You gon' need these." I never asked how she knew. Some things don't need asking. Ruth became my teacher. She showed me how herbs could heal, but also how they could slow, weaken, confuse. How people's minds could be shifted without them even realizing. We didn't call it magic. We called it memory. Memory of women before us. Women who refused to go quietly. One night, Jonah stumbled into the kitchen drunk and angry. He threw a copper pan at a scullery girl just because she didn't answer quick enough. The pan missed, but the message didn't. Ruth said nothing. But when Jonah ate his supper the next night and slept through a thunderstorm that rattled the windows, so deeply no one could rouse him, she looked at me and said, "That's the kind of silence they never expect." We didn't poison, not then. We whispered warnings, we planted seeds, we watched. But seeds grow. When I turned 18, the whispers changed. There were talks in the fields, talks about men riding at night with hidden torches, talks about a line through the forest that, if followed right, led to a river where freedom could begin. I didn't listen at first. I had my mama to care for, Ruth to protect, a little sister named June, with eyes too wide for her own good. But then Master Whitlow sold June, just like that. One morning she was there, humming a tune, by nightfall gone, no goodbye, no name of where, just gone. That broke something in me. Ruth found me in the barn, fists bloodied from punching wood-beam. She didn't try to calm me, she just sat beside me, pulled out that same cloth bundle and unwrapped a new piece, a sliver of iron sharpened to a whisper-thin edge. "We not running," she said. "We carving a different path." That night we lit a candle, a real one, risky but necessary. We laid out names: Master Whitlow, Overseer Griggs, the traders who came during harvest. We spoke each one, then we stared at the flame until it flickered blue. It wasn't just anger anymore, it was intention. They thought we were powerless, just girls in aprons and headscarves. But we were architects of storms. And storms, when quiet too long, learn how to roar. If you've ever wondered how people survive the impossible, how they resist without raising swords, how they fight from within chains. Then listen closely, because this is the story of what we did next. The morning after I escaped, I found myself crouched in a patch of tall brush just past the tree line. My breath came in short, sharp bursts, and every rustle of leaves sent fear shooting through my chest. The sky was only just beginning to lighten. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay still. I had stolen moments, hours at best, before they noticed I was gone. Behind me was everything I'd known. The plantation house with its white pillars and rotting soul, the stables that smelled of hay and blood, the quarters that were meant to break us down but had somehow kept us alive. And her, the woman who gave birth to me and whispered stories in my ear of freedom like they were fairy tales. She had died with her eyes open, and I never got to close them. Now I was alone, and I was hunted. I followed the stream at first, thinking the sound of running water would mask my movements. My legs stung from the whipping branches and thorny underbrush, and my stomach was already beginning to gnaw at itself. But I didn't care. I kept moving. I told myself I was walking towards something, anything, better. By midday, I stumbled onto a dirt road. I froze. I hadn't meant to. The sight of it, carved into the earth like a scar, pulled me in. It looked like it led somewhere, and that was enough for my aching feet. I moved along its edge, careful to keep low and behind the trees, heart racing with every distant sound. That was when I heard the hooves. I barely had time to duck behind a log before a rider came thundering past. He was wearing grey Confederate colors, and his hat sat low over his brow. A long rifle was strapped to his saddle, and a whip hung from his belt like a snake waiting to strike. My stomach turned. If he'd seen me, I'd be back in chains before the sun set, or worse. He passed without stopping. But not 2 minutes later, I heard another set of hooves, then another. They were looking for me. That night, I didn't sleep. I hid in the hollow of a tree trunk, curled in on myself, clutching a stick like it was a weapon. I thought about turning around. I thought about how easy it would be to walk back and throw myself at their feet and beg them not to beat me too badly. I thought about how that would mean food, shelter, predictability, but it would also mean slavery, and something deep in my chest said I'd rather die in the woods than go back. At dawn, I moved again. I stayed off the road this time, cutting through brush and thickets, my hands raw and bleeding. I followed the moss on the trees, the way my mother had once taught me, saying it always pointed north. She never told me where north led, but I clung to the direction like it was salvation. I stumbled upon a small cabin late that afternoon, smoke curling from its chimney. My instincts told me to run, but hunger said otherwise. I waited until the sun dipped low, then crept close enough to see through a crack in the wood. Inside, an old white man sat eating stew by the fire, a rifle propped up near his chair. I knew the risk, but I knocked anyway. When he opened the door and saw me, his face didn't change. Not anger, not pity, just silence. "Please," I said, "I need help." He looked me up and down, then stepped aside without a word. I sat at his table trembling, eyes locked on the bowl of stew he ladled out. He said nothing as I ate. When I finished, he poured me a second helping. "Where you headed?" he asked finally. "North," I said, though I had no clear idea what that meant. He nodded once. "There's a river that way. Couple days' walk. Folks say there's help on the other side." He gave me a blanket and let me sleep on the floor. I didn't close my eyes until I heard his soft snoring from the other side of the room. The next morning, he handed me a crust of bread and a small tin of salted meat. "Follow the river," he said. "Keep quiet. Don't trust too easy." I thanked him, but he was already closing the door. That man's name I never learned, but his kindness lived with me longer than his face. I walked for 3 more days, my feet blistered and bloodied, my mouth dry. But I made it to that river. And it was there, standing on its muddy banks, that I saw the first signs of something different. A group of people camped on the far side. A woman hung laundry on a line, while a man chopped wood. Children played in the dirt, their laughter soft but real. And every single one of them was black. I thought I was dreaming. They saw me, and the man dropped his axe and ran across the shallow ford. He didn't ask who I was. He just wrapped me in a rough hug and whispered, "You're safe now." For the first time since I'd run, I let myself cry. But I knew then I wasn't done. I hadn't escaped just to survive. I had to go back, not to the plantation, but to those still caught in its grip. They needed to know it was possible. They needed someone who had made it out, and I was going to be that someone. Life in that river camp was nothing like the world I had known. It was rough, yes, but not cruel. The air smelled of pine instead of blood. The people spoke gently instead of barking orders. And for the first time in my life, I felt what it was like to be seen as human. Her name was Elsie. She was one of the first women I met when I arrived. She had soft brown eyes and a voice like honey, though her hands were calloused from work. She was once a house servant in Charleston. She told me, but she ran after her master, sold her sister to a man out west. He told me she'd fetch a better price than cotton. Elsie whispered one night by the fire, her eyes glittering in the flames. So I put lye in his tea and slipped out before the morning bell. I stared at her, stunned. I thought I was alone in my rage, but there she was, flesh and blood, another soul who had tasted vengeance and survived. "You did that?" I asked, almost in disbelief. "I did," she said, not blinking. "And I'd do it again." We grew close in those first weeks. She showed me how to set traps in the forest, how to find edible roots, how to make poultices from crushed herbs. She taught me how to live not just as a fugitive, but as a free man. I soaked up everything she gave, because deep down I knew freedom wasn't safe unless you knew how to protect it. The others in camp had their own stories. There was old Nathan, who had a deep scar across his back shaped like a whip. He used to be a blacksmith. His arms were thick as tree trunks, and his face stayed quiet most days. But when he spoke, it carried weight. Then there was Clara, who came in one night, carrying a child on her hip and a hatchet in her hand. She never said what she'd done, but her silence told the story. The fire in her eyes matched the one that must have burned behind her. Each of us carried our wounds, visible or not. We shared bread, we shared stories, and slowly we became more than runaways. We became a family of ghosts who had clawed their way out of the grave, but the peace never lasted. One evening, as the sun sank low and shadows stretched long over the clearing, two men came running into camp, breathless and wide-eyed. "They're coming," one gasped. "Raiders, maybe bounty hunters, maybe worse." Panic cracked through camp like lightning. Some packed what they could and fled into the woods. Others froze in place, unsure what to do. We had always known this might happen. Freedom was a flame too bright to go unnoticed. Elsie grabbed my arm. "We have to go." But something stopped me. "How many?" I asked the men. "5. Maybe 6, one said. "Armed. Horses." I felt the fire rise in my chest. "We outnumber them," I said. "We have tools. We know this land. We don't have to run." Elsie stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had, but I was done running. Nathan stood slowly, cracking his knuckles. "He's right." And just like that, we began preparing. We laid traps along the forest paths, shallow pits with sharpened stakes, loose branches tied with twine ready to snap. Clara sharpened blades while others gathered rocks for throwing. We smeared mud on our faces and waited, hidden among the trees. At dawn they came. I heard them before I saw them, hoofs thudding against the earth, voices laughing, cruel and cocky. They weren't bounty hunters. They were slavers. Drunk on power and whiskey, thinking we'd be easy prey, the first horse stepped into the snare. The beast reared screaming and threw its rider into the underbrush. That was our signal. We moved like shadows, swinging from trees, striking with stones and sticks and fury. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't clean, but it was effective. One man ran, screaming, with Nathan close behind. Another begged for his life, before Clara buried her hatchet in his leg. I caught one trying to reload his rifle. He was young, maybe just a year or two older than me. His hands shook as he raised the barrel. I didn't give him the chance. I slammed into him with the weight of everything I'd endured. Every whip, every chain, every night I prayed to die. When it was over, we were bruised, bloodied, but alive. The others, they weren't. The camp buzzed with quiet awe. We had done the unthinkable. We had fought back, and later that night, as the fires burned low and the adrenaline faded, Elsie sat beside me. "You're not like the rest," she said. "I'm tired of hiding," I told her. "And I'm not going to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Then let's give 'em something to look over their shoulder for." That night, a plan began to form. A different kind of escape. Not from slavery, but from silence, from fear. We wouldn't just survive, we would make them remember. The camp changed after that day. Something had shifted, not just in the land beneath our feet, but in our spirits. We were no longer runaways hiding in the shadows. We were warriors, survivors. And in that transformation, I saw the beginning of something bigger than any of us. Word spread fast through the underground channels about a band of escaped slaves who stood their ground and lived to tell about it. People began arriving from all corners, stragglers, wounded souls, mothers with babies wrapped in rags, old men limping through the brush. They were drawn not just to our shelter, but to our story. We had become a kind of legend, and legends, I learned, had power. But legends also attract danger. It wasn't long before we noticed changes. Broken branches near the perimeter, odd footprints that didn't belong to any of us. We stopped cooking smoke-heavy meals. We rotated night guards, but in our hearts we knew they were watching. One evening, Nathan pulled me aside. "I know that look in your eye," he said. "You're thinking of doing something bold." I didn't deny it. I had been restless since the raid. My mind burned with thoughts of the ones we left behind, the men, women, and children still trapped in iron and silence, and the ones who made their lives hell. "Too many of us are still in chains," I said, "and they're never going to stop hunting us, so maybe it's time we started hunting back." He didn't flinch. How, that was the question that kept me up at night. How? I didn't want chaos. I wanted purpose. And soon I had. Elsie returned from a scouting trip with news that shook me. A plantation not far from where we were had begun rounding up freed blacks, claiming they were escaped property. They'd taken a mother and her teenage son just the week before. No trial, no records, just gone. I recognized the name of the overseer there, Jeremiah Cutchins, a name I'd heard whispered in the dark corners of the quarters back when I was still enslaved. A man whose cruelty was so monstrous, even the white folks called him cursed. He'd once buried a boy alive for stealing a slice of bread. "That's our start," I said. "That man, that place." The others gathered around the fire as I laid it out. We wouldn't storm in like fools. We'd be ghosts, striking where they least expected. Not to destroy blindly, but to send a message, to expose them, to show the world what they really were. Some hesitated, but most nodded. They had lost too much to sit idle. That week we trained harder than ever. Elsie taught us how to move silently through tall grass. Nathan forged knives from old tools. Clara carved strange symbols into wood and buried them near the paths leading to the plantation. Part protection, part warning. She didn't speak of where she learned it. No one asked. The night we left, the moon was thin and pale. The air was heavy with tension, thick enough to choke on. We moved in groups of 3, each with a task. Mine was simple. Find Jeremiah. Make sure he didn't live to see another sunrise. We reached the edge of the plantation before midnight. The fields stretched out like a graveyard of broken promises. I could smell the smoke from the big house's chimney. Laughter floated on the air. A celebration, maybe. Or just another night where monsters wore smiles. I crept around the back, heart pounding in my ears. A dog barked once, but Clara had already left scraps laced with herbs to put them to sleep. I slipped inside through the pantry window. The kitchen was dark, except for the dull glow of embers. I moved past the hallway, careful not to touch anything. Every creak felt like a shout in the silence. Then I saw him. Jeremiah. He was alone in his study, sipping from a glass, feet propped on a desk. He was older now, grey in the beard, heavier in the gut. But evil doesn't age out. I stood in the doorway watching. "Who in the hell?" he began, but his voice died in his throat when he saw my face. "You remember me?" I asked. His eyes narrowed. "You one of mine, not anymore." He lunged for the pistol on his desk, but I was faster. I pinned him to the chair, blade at his throat. "You buried that boy," I whispered. "And you laughed when his mama screamed." He grunted, sweating. "That wasn't me. That was policy. That word, policy, burned hotter than fire." "You were policy," I said, pressing harder. "But tonight I'm judgment." I didn't give him the dignity of begging. By the time I left the room, the fire in my chest had cooled. I felt no triumph, only clarity. I joined the others as smoke began curling toward the sky. We hadn't burned the place to the ground, but we left behind the truth, scrawled on walls, scratched into doors, messages that no white man could ignore. "We see you, no more chains. They will rise by dawn." We were gone. Back to the trees, back to the hush of the camp. But something had shifted again. We weren't fugitives anymore. We were the reckoning. The fire we lit that night didn't just consume the air. It burned into the hearts of everyone who heard about it. Within days, whispers had turned into warnings, and those warnings were carried on horseback from plantation to plantation. "The ghosts are real," they said. "They come at night. They write on walls and don't leave bodies. Only messages." We became myth, and that suited us just fine. But myth doesn't protect you from bullets, and legend doesn't feed your people. We needed more than courage now. We needed strategy. Elsie suggested we divide into cells, small groups that could scatter and strike without ever endangering the whole. I agreed, but it weighed heavy on me. The camp was our home. Sending people out meant risking never seeing them again. That night, as the others slept, I stood at the edge of the firelight, watching the shadows move in the trees. Nathan joined me, arms crossed, eyes narrowed at the stars. "You think we're doing the right thing?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. He picked up a twig and threw it into the fire. "I think we're doing what needs to be done," he said. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning we split. Nathan, Clara, and 2 others went north, toward the river plantation. Elsie and her crew moved east, toward a rail depot, where they heard of shackled children being sold to mining companies. I stayed behind. I had a different mission, because as much as I hated the slavers, I hated their collaborators more. There were black men who wore the master's coat, who walked freely while others bled, who whispered secrets in exchange for promises. They were worse than the enemy. They were the reason some of our raids failed, the reason friends disappeared. And there was one in particular I'd been watching for months, David Knox. Born free, raised in the house of a wealthy merchant, he built a name for himself among white men. Dressed in silk, quoting scripture, pretending to be one of them. But behind closed doors, he was their spy. I knew he passed notes. I knew he tipped off marshals. I just needed proof and a plan. I followed him to church one Sunday morning, dressed in rags, face hidden beneath a borrowed bonnet. He preached from the pulpit like he was Moses himself, speaking of patience and obedience, about earning your place in this world. The white folks smiled. The enslaved folks stared down at their feet. When service ended, I slipped out and waited behind the stables. Sure enough, minutes later, I saw him slide a folded paper into the coat of a passing officer. That was all I needed. Back at camp, I gathered a few trusted friends. "Tomorrow night," I said, "we silence a serpent." I didn't tell them what I planned to do. That wasn't their burden. I crept into town after midnight, past the watchman who barely stayed awake. I knew the back alley behind his home, knew the broken latch on the window. I'd studied his habits for months. He always left his whiskey glass half full on the table, always took his boots off at the door. When I slipped in, the house was silent. He was in his bed, snoring like a man with no guilt. I stood over him for what felt like hours. Why? That's what haunted me. Why betray your own? Why sell out men and women who could have been your blood? I wanted to shake him awake and demand answers, but I knew men like him didn't deserve questions. They just deserved silence. When the blade met his throat, his eyes opened wide, but he didn't make a sound. That was the only mercy I gave him. I left a single word carved into the wall above his bed. Traitor. The next day, the city buzzed with fear. Whispers grew louder. They don't just strike at slavers. They strike at their own. We weren't just resistance anymore. We were reckoning. We were judgment. And for the first time in my life, I saw fear in their eyes. Not just in the enslavers, but in the system itself. The marshals doubled their patrols. Churches prayed harder, and deep in the woods our numbers grew. Every soul we freed brought stories of horror, yes, but also of hope. One woman told of a girl named Ruth who'd poisoned her master's entire family during a wedding feast. A boy spoke of a midwife who'd switched babies at birth, raising the master's heir as a field hand. These stories weren't just tales. They were blueprints. They were signs that this storm wasn't ours alone. We were part of something larger. And if I ever doubted our path, those stories reminded me. We were not alone. We were many, and we were rising. Freedom is a strange thing when you've never truly held it. You can taste it, like smoke on the wind. You can dream of it, build plans around it. But when it's finally in your hands, tangible and hot and pulsing with life, you start to question if you're ready for what comes next. That's how I felt the morning the girl came into our camp. She couldn't have been more than 10, barefoot, eyes wide, arms trembling as she clutched a rusted cooking spoon like a weapon. She didn't speak for hours, just sat by the fire and stared. Later, she told me her name was Alma. Her mother had been whipped to death for stealing a biscuit. Her father had been chained and sold the week before, and Alma, she ran straight into the woods and didn't stop. She was one of dozens who found us that spring. Our camp grew like roots in the soil, tents turning into cabins, fire pits into gathering spots. We taught each other to trap, to stitch, to read. Some days felt like a dream, like a life stolen from the future. And with that, so did the retribution. One afternoon, Nathan returned with blood in his eyes. He slammed a burlap sack onto the table. Inside, a broken pair of shackles and a letter sealed with the governor's mark. It was a bounty notice, $1,000 for each of us. 10,000 for me. They know who we are now, he said. Not just ghosts anymore, names, faces. I felt the weight of that truth settle in my bones. They weren't afraid of shadows anymore. They were coming for flesh. We had to move. Again, but not before one last message. There was a plantation just over the ridge, Hawthorne Estate, known for its cruelty, its grand parties, and its new heir. Caleb Hawthorne, young, arrogant, and desperate to prove he wasn't soft like his daddy. I'd heard stories about him, how he'd force women to dance in the fields for entertainment, how he'd mock their scars and laugh when they flinched. So we decided he'd be our warning shot. Nathan, Elsie, and I dressed in rags and chained ourselves in a cart like cattle. Another brother posed as a trader, bringing us in as fresh stock. It was risky, but we'd done worse. The guards barely looked twice. Inside, the estate reeked of wine and perfume. Lanterns lit every room. Music played like sin in the air. Caleb greeted us with a grin, sipping from a golden cup. Well, he drawled, "You brought me quite the batch." Then he stepped closer, close enough for me to smell the tobacco on his breath, and said, "This one's got spirit." He grabbed my chin, and that's when I nodded. 3 seconds later, the fire started. Not real fire, smoke bombs laced with pitch, enough to blind, enough to confuse. Elsie struck the first guard. Nathan took the second. I wrapped Caleb's own chains around his neck and whispered in his ear, "Remember this face. We didn't kill him, we let him live, because fear spreads faster than blood." By the time we rode out of that estate, every guest was screaming, stumbling in smoke, certain that hell itself had come for them. And in a way, it had. That raid echoed through the south like thunder. We didn't just break in, we humiliated them, and humiliation was something they couldn't swallow. In the weeks that followed, wanted posters flooded the towns. Militia units were dispatched with dogs and torches. Even the newspapers began to print our names. Twisted versions, of course. Rebel butchers, they called us. Savages. But every lie they told only made the truth burn hotter, because people were waking up. Not just the enslaved, but poor white folks too. Immigrants, runaways, anyone crushed beneath the boot of power. I started receiving notes, slipped into hollow trees, pinned to bread loaves. Some were pleas for help. Others were offers to fight. We were no longer a band of rebels. We were a movement. But movements are delicate, and all it takes is one betrayal to shatter the spine. One night, Clara came to me, face pale, lips shaking. "They found one of the safe houses," she whispered. I sat upright. "Who, Josiah's?" "On the river bend." "It's gone. Everyone's gone." A cold washed over me. We had to act, fast. But deep down, I knew this wasn't random. Someone had talked. Trust is the hardest thing to rebuild once it cracks. After the safe house on the river bend was burned, I stood at its ashes the next morning, sifting through what little remained. A child's wooden toy, half charred, a boot, blood-soaked cloth. No bodies were left behind. That was their message. Make us disappear. Turn us into smoke. We buried what we could in silence. No tears, not in front of the little ones. But inside I boiled. Josiah had 2 daughters. One of them, Ruthie, used to braid my hair while I carved tools. She was only 6. I still see her when I close my eyes. So I called a meeting. We circled the fire, 37 of us now, faces lit orange by flame and fear. "One of us is a traitor," I said. The words hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. I saw glances, tense shoulders, clenched fists. This was how movements fell apart, from the inside. But I had a plan. We faked a route. Told half the camp we were moving east through the pine trail, the other half west through the bog. Then we waited. By the 3rd night, the pine trail was ambushed. Militia, dogs, riflemen. No one from our side was there. It was all a ghost trail. But now we knew the traitor was among those told about the pines. It narrowed the list to 5, and one of them was Ezra. He had joined us 2 months prior. Said he escaped from a sugar plantation near Charleston. Said he lost his sister to a branding pit. But something about his stories never added up. One night I followed him. He didn't notice me, not at first. Slipped into the woods with a torch and a piece of parchment. He walked for nearly a mile before stopping at an old cypress tree, buried something beneath it. I waited until he left. When I dug it up, I found the map. Our map, with names, routes, camp spots, all neatly drawn, and a note, "Next raid expected near Millfield." I took it back in silence. Ezra didn't run. He didn't plead. When we brought him before the fire, he just looked at me and said, "They promised to free my brother." I asked him, "Do you even have a brother?" He didn't answer. We banished him, didn't kill him. Some wanted to, but I wouldn't let the movement become a mirror of the thing we hated. Let him face the woods, let the trees decide his fate. Still, the damage was done. We had to vanish again, deeper this time, into the hollow marshes where even birds seemed to whisper secrets. It was there I met Solomon, an old man, skin like leather, hair white as frost. He lived alone in a shack built from driftwood and moss. Watched us from a distance for days before stepping into the clearing. "You're the firewalker," he said to me. I didn't know what he meant. "I seen you in dreams," he continued. "Black smoke rising behind you, feet bleeding but walking still." He offered us shelter, taught us the secrets of the marsh, how to hide from dogs, how to walk where the land seems to melt beneath your feet. And in return, we taught him something too. That revolution didn't care for age. He became one of us. One night, as the rain came down in sheets, Solomon told me about the bone tree, said it was where they used to hang people. "Not just slaves, but anyone who dared to speak. There's power there," he whispered. "Old power, pain power. Blood soaked so deep it never dries." We went there together, carved names into the bark, names of the lost, the burned, the drowned. It became sacred to us, not because of vengeance, but because it reminded us why we couldn't stop. By now we weren't just surviving, we were winning. 3 plantations had fallen to coordinated raids, dozens freed, weapons gathered. Whispers of us reached even the ports. I heard a sailor once say, "Don't go inland. The spirits will get you." Spirits. I like that. Let them think we were ghosts. It made us stronger. Still, I carried guilt. For Josiah, for Alma, for Ruthie, for every life we couldn't save. That weight never leaves you. You just learn to carry it quieter. Then came the news that changed everything. The governor's nephew, Thomas Brandel, was getting married. Big ceremony, rich family, ties to the Cotton Empire. And guess where they were holding it? At the Hawthorne estate, Caleb's place. The same one we raided. That felt like a sign. No, more than that, it was a challenge. They thought we were shadows. It was time to remind them, shadows can strangle. I didn't sleep the night we made the plan. Thomas Brandel's wedding wasn't just an event. It was an opportunity wrapped in velvet and arrogance. The powerful would be gathered under one roof, dancing on the backs of the broken. What better place to strike? We had 2 weeks. The Hawthorne estate had been rebuilt. New guards, new dogs, iron fences now surrounded the manor. But walls don't stop ghosts, and by then that's what we were. The plan was simple but bold. 3 teams, one would distract, set fire to the barn at dusk. The second would cut the lights. No moon that night. Perfect. And my team, we'd walk straight through the front doors dressed as servants. We had the uniforms, we had the grace, and we had the rage. Solomon warned us, this ain't revenge. It's remembrance, don't lose yourself, but I already had. The night before the raid, we carved a mark into the bone tree, 3 slashes in a circle. It was the sign we'd leave behind, so they'd know we weren't done. Wedding day. The estate was dressed like a bride. White linens, rose garlands, glowing lanterns swinging from the trees. Music floated through the air like perfume. Laughter, clinking glasses, ignorance on display. They thought they were untouchable. I stood in the kitchen, apron tied, tray in hand. A smile painted on like war paint. Beside me was Ruth, the daughter of a preacher who once sheltered us in his barn. She carried a tray of drinks, hands steady, eyes like fire. The signal was a shattered wine glass. When I heard it, when that crystal broke, I moved out of the kitchen, past the guests through the hall, up the stairs, straight into the room where Thomas Brandel was fixing his collar, admiring himself in the mirror. He didn't see me at first. When he turned, I saw confusion, then recognition, then fear. He remembered the raid, he remembered the fire, but he didn't remember names, not mine, not Josiah's, not Ruthie's. To him, we were shadows, until I said, "Your wedding is lovely." Then I slammed the door shut behind me. Downstairs, the lights went out, screams followed, gunshots, the house tilted into chaos. But I was already moving, tied Thomas's hands with silk, gagged him with his own wedding sash, dragged him down the stairs while guests scrambled like ants. Ruth opened the cellar door. We threw him in. He screamed against the gag, but no one heard. We locked it behind us. The barn was burning by then, great sheets of flame licking the sky. The horses broke free, guests screamed, dogs howled. We left the sign on the gate, 3 slashes, a circle, then we vanished. By dawn we were miles away. News traveled fast. "The Ghost Army strikes again," they said. Whispers of a rebel slave leader spread across the south. Some called me the Shadow. Others said I didn't exist at all. But my name, I never told it. Not yet, because the fight wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. The wedding raid changed things. It wasn't just revenge, it was a message. To every man, woman, and child still shackled. To every overseer who thought his whip made him God, we were coming. A week later, a stranger arrived at our marsh camp. His name was David, tall, strong, maybe in his 30s. But it was his eyes that struck me. They'd seen pain and refused to blink. He said he'd heard about us, said he wanted to help. We tested him, like always, but he passed, and he brought something we hadn't had before. Maps, not of trails, not of hiding spots, but of supply chains, trade routes, weapon caches, guard patrols. He was a former cartographer for the Confederates, turned his back on them after they branded his wife. We took him in. That was the first time I allowed myself to believe this might actually work, that we could win. But not everyone believed. One night around the fire, I overheard a whisper, "She's taking it too far. She'll get us all killed." They didn't know I was listening, didn't know I was already wondering the same thing. But I couldn't stop. I wouldn't. Because every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ruthie's braids. I saw Josiah's hands holding mine in the flames, and I knew the truth. Some ghosts don't rest until the world changes. We moved by moonlight. Every new raid we planned, we etched into the dirt with charcoal and ash. No paper, no trace. I began to feel more like a general than a fugitive, but that didn't change the blood on my hands. David's maps helped us hit supply lines between Charleston and Augusta. We stopped a wagon train full of muskets once, tipped the barrels into the swamp, made the men walk back barefoot. We hit jailhouses too, set fire to one in Broad Creek, let the prisoners out. Some ran, some joined. Our numbers grew, not into hundreds, but enough to sting. They started calling us the Marsh Wrath. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. We were a movement now, a whispered fear in the minds of plantation owners, a prayer on the lips of the enslaved. And I was still nameless to most of them, but that suited me fine. Solomon called a meeting one night, said we needed to decide what we were. Freedom fighters, vigilantes, or ghosts of vengeance, he asked. The group was quiet. No one wanted to answer, so I did. We're a promise, I said. A promise that no cruelty will go unpunished, that no man's hands stay clean if they hold the whip. No one argued, but Ruth pulled me aside afterward. "You talk like you ain't coming back from this," she said. I didn't answer, because part of me knew I wasn't. Our next target was personal. Not for me, but for Clara. She'd been quiet since she joined. Always in the back, eyes down, sleeves long. But one night while we sat near the fire, she told her story. A tobacco baron in Edgefield took her from her mother when she was 9, branded her when she tried to run, burned her mother alive when she tried again. His name was Emery Tulls. She hadn't said it aloud in years. Saying it now shook something loose in all of us. "We're gonna Edgefield," I said. No votes, no debates. That was the law now. Edgefield was tighter than most towns. Militias, watchtowers, dogs. But they weren't watching the canal. We floated in on rafts, silent as fog. Clara led us to the estate. We scouted for 2 days, memorized shifts, learned when Tulls liked his bourbon, when his guards liked to nap. Then we struck. Ruth knocked out the lanterns with slingshot rocks. David and Solomon snuck through the back. I took the front. The door was unlocked. Tulls was in his study, drunk and dozing. When he woke, Clara was standing over him, holding a branding iron pulled from his own fireplace. His eyes widened. "You." She didn't speak. She pressed the iron to his chest, right over his heart. I turned away. But I didn't stop her. Some justice ain't meant to be pretty. We left Tulls breathing, but screaming, tied to his own porch, shirtless, so everyone could see what we'd done. We carved our mark again, 3 slashes. A circle. It started to mean something now. People whispered about it in towns. Some swore it was the sign of a ghost army. Others said it was the devil come for slaveholders. They weren't entirely wrong. We'd become the thing they feared at night, the monster they created. Trouble came after Edgefield. A bounty was placed. $1,000 for me, dead or alive, $500 for the others. And then they started taking slaves hostage. Every time a raid happened, they'd grab someone, anyone, and hang them in the square as an example. It made us pause, made me question the line we were walking. Ruth came to me one night. Her voice was low, tired. "They're killing innocents because of us." I knew she was right. I just didn't know what else to do. I hadn't started this to make martyrs. I started it for justice, but justice, it seemed, came with a price I hadn't counted on. Then one night, as the wind screamed through the cypress and the frogs hushed in the marsh, a little boy ran into camp. He was 10, maybe younger, clothes torn, bleeding from the leg. They coming," he stammered. "Big party, dogs, lanterns. They know where y'all are." I didn't ask how he knew. Didn't ask who sent him. Just gave him food, wrapped his wound, and told him to run as far as he could. Because war had found us again. The trees weren't quiet that night. Even the owls stopped calling. We knew they were coming before the dogs howled. You could feel it, like thunder just beyond the trees. Like the air itself held its breath. We didn't have long. David scouted to the north ridge, came back pale. 30 or more, he said. Lanterns, horses, dogs. They're flanking, Ruth added. Pushing us to the river, I looked out over our camp, scattered under a canopy of moss and oak. The hammocks, the hidden food pits, the carved signs on trees. All of it gone. We wouldn't be coming back. We didn't run. We scattered, split into 3 groups, just like we'd practiced. East, south, and riverward. I took the river. Ruth went south. Solomon and David took the east. The plan was simple. Divide their force, bait them into confusion. Use the fog, the water, the swamp, and survive. But plans don't always hold when bullets start flying. The first musket cracked near the old willow tree. I heard the splash of someone going under. Maybe Clara, maybe one of the new boys. I didn't stop to check. There were men in grey jackets rushing down the slope, shouting, reloading, lighting torches. The swamp lit up like a bonfire. I crawled through the reeds, soaked to the bone, muskets slung behind my back. Every breath sounded too loud. Every branch underfoot cracked like thunder. At one point, a dog caught my scent. Big brute, hound with yellow eyes and a raw red collar. He charged before I could draw, but he didn't reach me. Ruth stepped from the shadows, blade in hand. One motion, one yelp, gone. She didn't speak, just looked at me and pointed. Keep moving, her eyes said. So I did. We regrouped hours later, half the group missing, David limping, Solomon bruised, Clara covered in mud. 2 were captured. We knew what that meant. I sat under a twisted birch, water dripping from my hair, and felt the fire drain out of me. What now? Clara asked. She wasn't crying, none of us were. There wasn't any energy left for tears. David spoke first. We can't stay together. Everyone turned to him. They'll expect it. They'll hunt us in a pack. But if we scatter 5 here, 3 there, they'll lose the scent. I hated it, but he was right. That night we burned what little was left of our maps and plans. We split our food, and we disappeared. The next few weeks were silence. No raids, no marks, no vengeance. I stayed low in the ruins of a sugar mill near Savannah. Rats kept me company. The brick walls still smelled like ash. I didn't speak to anyone, didn't trust anyone, until one day an old woman brought me bread. She didn't say her name, just placed it near the doorway with a folded note. They say you are the ghost. If true, ghosts don't die. Come back, that note did something to me. Reminded me who I was. I began again, small at first, poisoning the horses at a slave auction, slashing the harnesses on wagons carrying chained men, cutting the bridge ropes at a plantation crossing. They never saw me, never heard me, but the mark returned. 3 slashes, a circle, each one like a whisper in the dark, we are still here. Then one night near Beaufort, I saw a flame on the horizon. A barn burning, and beside it, painted in fire across the field, was our mark. I wasn't alone. Others were still fighting, still remembering, still bleeding. The marsh wrath wasn't gone, just scattered, like embers in the wind, waiting for the next storm to rise. The moment I saw the mark again, burned into a field, glowing beneath the night sky. It was like feeling your heartbeat after nearly drowning. I wasn't alone. Somewhere out there my people were still moving, still resisting, still waiting. I couldn't waste another second hiding. The wrath needed to rise again, so I started walking. First stop was St. John's Parish. There had been whispers of an older man causing disruption, sabotaging tools, freeing livestock, setting fields alight. Some called him a drunk, others a demon. I knew better. It was Solomon. I found him 3 days later. He was living out in the pine brush, beard grown thick, voice hoarse from disuse. But when I showed him the mark, etched into the blade of my knife, he didn't hesitate. I thought we were done, he said. Thought we lost. We're not done, I answered. We were just scattered, he smiled. The wrath was 2 again. Next came Ruth. Tracking her was harder. She'd gone underground, literally. Hiding in tunnels carved beneath an old church, feeding orphans and fugitives with stolen food and scripture. She looked different. Leaner, eyes sharper than before. But the moment she saw me, she dropped the lantern and hugged me so hard I thought my ribs might snap. You came back. We all are. Within hours, she packed up and followed. Now we were 3. The new plan wasn't about survival anymore. It was about legacy. We weren't going to just burn barns or spook slavers. We were going to leave stories behind, so big, so wild that no one would forget us. We started with Edgewater Plantation. Place had once housed over 300 souls, half gone now, sold or dead. The owner, Judge McFarland, was a cruel man. Held his trials in the parlor, his gallows behind the stables. We marked his field first, then we snuck in, freed 17 in one night, set the sugarcane to flame, and left a scroll nailed to the gates. The wrath lives. We do not beg. The next day, papers across the South called it a coordinated uprising. We just called it a message. Every raid was sharper, faster. Clara returned. She'd been living with a freedwoman in a border town, learning medicine and codes. She brought maps, vials, and a fury I hadn't seen before. When we hit a trader's caravan near Augusta, she didn't hesitate. She poisoned their coffee. 4 slave buyers died in their sleep. No blood, no noise, just silence. And our mark carved into the wagon. The wrath had become a shadow. No one knew how many of us there were. Some said a dozen. Others claimed hundreds. We let them believe what they wanted. All that mattered was this. They were afraid again. Not just of bullets or blades, but of a story, of a ghost, of the marsh wrath. There was one final raid we planned. One that would break the legend into fire and smoke. Tinsley's Market, the largest human auction in the region. Thousands gathered there, buyers, owners, guards, and in the center, a cage of chained children. We'd never hit a target so big, but Ruth said it best. If we die here, we'll die louder than anyone before us. So we planned, for weeks, drawings, disguises, distractions. A full cart of gunpowder, a mule fitted with a stolen badge, fake papers, real knives. Everything was ready, except the part where we survived. The night before the raid, I sat alone on a hill near the market. I looked down at all those torches, all that noise, and thought of my mother. How she once hummed lullabies while sewing in the dark. How she'd said, stories are the only things they can't sell. She was right. This was our story now. Not just blood and vengeance, but a reckoning. Dawn cracked behind the auction house like a whip. Gold light spilled across the courtyard where children huddled in cages and men laughed over ledgers. Tinsley's Market was alive with evil, and we walked straight into its heart. I wore a preacher's coat and hat. Ruth posed as a nanny, Clara a merchant's aide. Solomon drove the cart, its belly loaded with powder, wrapped in linens and labeled as tea. We passed guards, past dogs, past a preacher who nodded at me, mistaking me for one of his own. Every step closer made my hands itch. Every heartbeat roared in my ears. Then I saw her. The girl 8, maybe 9, knees scraped, hair matted. Her eyes met mine through the bars. No fear, no tears. Just silence, as if she already knew what was coming. As if she'd been waiting for me. We moved fast. Solomon parked a cart behind the block, just past the auction stage. Ruth handed out fake papers, transfers, inspections, mandated relocations. She whispered to guards, slipped vials into drinks, made men dizzy and forgetful. Clara found the chain keys. I climbed the stage, looked over the crowd. Dozens of men in fine coats, fans fluttering, paddles raised, laughter like broken teeth. Then I spoke. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, voice smooth like riverstone. Before you bid, let me offer a parable. They paused. Curiosity always works better than chaos. There was once a man who chained a panther. I walked the stage. He beat it, starved it, mocked it, thought it would always lie still. A few men chuckled. One sipped bourbon. But one day the panther's eyes changed. It didn't roar, didn't growl, just waited. They were listening now, because it knew. Patience was sharper than claws. I lit the fuse, a slow one, buried in straw beneath the cart. Then I walked off the stage, straight to the girl. Clara swung the cage open. Run, I whispered. And then it happened. A boom like thunder cracking bone. The cart vanished in white fire. Fire. The auction block split like rotted wood. People screamed. Horses bolted. Chains snapped. Guns drawn too late. We didn't fight. We vanished. Through smoke, through screaming, through stories. That night, 23 children disappeared into the swamps. And with them, the myth of the marsh wrath turned real. We went quiet again, not out of fear, but out of legend. Too much noise and they'd find us. Too little and they'd forget. So we became something else. Not a group, a ghost. One that whispered to the ones still bound. That vengeance was possible. That blood could boil even in silence. A week later, a paper in Charleston wrote, "A holy fire at Tinsley's, abolitionist plot or demon's curse." We smiled. They didn't know the half. Time passed. The swamps quieted. The names of the dead faded from ledgers, but not from memory. The girl from the cage, her name was Mary, grew tall and strong. She ran messages, learned the trees, learned which leaves healed and which ones burned. She became one of us. Our family had changed. Not just in numbers, but in purpose. We no longer ran, we reached. One night under a blood-orange moon, Ruth laid out a map. Burnt corners, smudged ink. Every dot marked a plantation. Each dot had a name, a face, a memory. Clara pointed to one near the coast. 3 dozen held. Overseer with a silver tooth. Doesn't carry a gun. Carries a whip. She didn't have to say more. That was enough. We struck before sunrise. Not with torches or guns. With silence. We cut the horses loose. Slipped powders in mourning pots. Replaced chains with ropes tied to trees. No one saw us. Not clearly. By the time the sun crested the pines, the big house was empty, and the cabins were scattered. So were the stories. They'd say it was spirits. They'd say it was vengeance. They were half right. In time they gave us names. Some called us the Marsh. Others whispered about the hollow choir, voices that sang before the bloodletting. One paper named me Gideon Gray, a preacher of flame and fury. They never guessed my real name. And that was the point, because I was never just one man. I was Ruth spooning poison into steel. I was Solomon hammering spikes into bridges. I was Clara, whispering into ears that thought they couldn't hear hope anymore. And I was the little girl who ran from the cage and returned with fire in her veins. Years passed. Freedom came, but not justice. Men who had torn families apart lived on in brick houses, pretending not to remember the screams. But we remembered. We taught children, not just to read, but to choose when to whisper and when to roar. We built homes, built names, built graves for the ones who never got them. And me, I returned to the cabin once more. Old wood, quiet moss, a rusted pan still by the hearth. I lit a candle, sat in the silence. Then I opened a small box. Inside, a silver tooth, wrapped in a ribbon stained by time. Not all stories end in trials, or pardons, or headlines. Some end in whispers under trees. Some end in names never spoken again. But they matter, because every flame, every scream, every vanished overseer wasn't vengeance, it was balance. If you followed this far, then know this. Justice doesn't always wear a badge. Sometimes it wears chains. Sometimes it walks barefoot through swamps. And sometimes it walks beside you, quiet and watching. Wait. I knew I couldn't wait much longer. Every second I hesitated. The risk of getting caught grew. But it wasn't just fear driving me now. It was rage, the kind that boiled beneath your skin and took hold of every breath you drew. For years I had waited, planned, endured. Now I had to act like the ghost I'd become. Silent, steady, but inevitable. The house was quieter than usual that night. Rain had been threatening all day, and by sundown, it had turned into a steady pour. Thunder cracked in the distance, a sound that seemed to echo every beat of my racing heart. The old master had retired early after a long bout of drink. Most of the house servants had found excuses to disappear to the quarters. All except one, Clarence. He had been watching me for days, hovering, asking questions. Not directly. He wasn't foolish enough for that, but close enough for me to know. I'd see his eyes follow me in the fields, catch him at the edge of corners when I thought I was alone. Maybe he sensed something, or maybe he was just waiting for his own moment, but I couldn't let him get in the way. I stood by the edge of the back porch, rain slicking the ground beneath me. I knew Clarence would come this way. He always took the back route through the kitchen, heading out for his nightly smoke. He had a rhythm, a routine. That's what made people predictable. And predictability was survival's greatest ally. Sure enough, just after the 9th chime of the broken porch clock, I heard the door creak. The faint shuffle of boots followed. Clarence didn't bother with a lantern, never did. He liked the dark, claimed it gave him peace. But peace was the last thing waiting for him out there that night. I stepped back into the shadows, heart-thudding, breath slow. He didn't see me until he was too close to react. My hand clamped down over his mouth as the other pressed a blade, small, sharp, and silent, against his throat. "Make a sound," I whispered, "and it'll be your last." His eyes went wide, wild. He didn't fight, he knew better. Clarence was many things, but stupid wasn't one of them. I guided him back into the barn behind the house, one hand always firm on the blade. The storm outside masked our steps. Inside, I pushed him to his knees. "You been watching me?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer. I said, "You watching me?" Clarence nodded once. "Why?" He swallowed. I knew something was off. "You moved different now, like you'd done let go of something." He was right. I crouched in front of him, blade still firm in my hand. "Then you know what comes next." He looked me in the eyes. "You gonna kill them all?" It wasn't a question. I stood up. "That's right. And you got a choice now." He straightened slightly. "Which is, you help me finish this, or you disappear. But if you try to stop me, I'll treat you same as them." Clarence didn't hesitate long. "I won't stop you. I never liked them anyhow." I stepped back. "Then get out of here. Tonight, you vanish. You forget my face. You say nothing, not to a soul." He nodded and stood, trembling. God help you, brother. God been gone a long time. I watched him vanish into the storm. Now it was just me and the final piece. Back in the house, the air was thick with old wood, rain, and something else. Anticipation. I moved silently, footsteps masked by the thunder. I passed the study, the hallway lined with dusty portraits of men who had done terrible things and smiled while doing them. The master's door creaked when I touched it. He was asleep, sprawled across his bed like a king drunk on his own power. I stared at him for a long time. He had been my nightmare for most of my life, but now he was just flesh and breath. I stepped closer. My hand trembled, not with fear, but with the sheer weight of the moment. I raised the same blade I'd used on his overseer, the same one I kept hidden through every whipping, every back-breaking task. Then I paused. This wasn't about blood anymore. Killing him would be justice, but it wouldn't erase what he'd done, the lives ruined, the children lost, my own family shattered by his hands. No, this wasn't vengeance anymore. This was a message, one written not with steel but with shame. Instead of striking, I tied him down to his bed with the very belts he used on others. I gagged him, made sure he couldn't cry out. Then I took everything, his records, his deeds, his personal letters, and I burned them in the fireplace before his eyes. He woke during the blaze, choking on smoke, eyes wide with panic. But I stood there, calm, watching him see everything he owned turn to ash, his legacy, his wealth, his control, gone in minutes. Then I leaned in close. "You're gonna live, old man. You're gonna live, and remember this. Every night you close your eyes, you'll see me. Every breath you take, you'll taste the fire that took everything." I left him screaming behind the gag, coughing in the smoke, tied to the bed where he once ruled like a god. Outside the storm was easing, but in me a new storm was just beginning. Because I wasn't finished yet. Not until the entire system came crashing down. I could feel the end coming, but it wasn't going to be quiet. Rumors of strange happenings had begun to spread through the neighboring plantations. Folks whispered of a curse lingering in the air, livestock dying suddenly, wells drying up, crops withering. The master grew paranoid, believing someone, me, had done something unnatural. He wasn't wrong. By then, I had gathered everything I needed. Not just herbs or chants, but power. Power born from years of pain, from secrets whispered in the shadows of pine trees, from voices of women who'd suffered before me and would never be heard. I'd placed the last charm beneath the master's floorboards 2 nights ago. The bones of a black rooster, soaked in his son's blood and bound with strands of his wife's hair. The room reeked of rot, though no one could find the source. He hadn't slept in days, neither had I, but I wasn't tired. The night I chose to end it was thick with fog. The air didn't move. Even the crickets fell silent. I walked into the house unchallenged. No one dared stop me anymore. The others, enslaved and free, had come to fear and respect what I had become. Some called me a priestess. Others said I was the devil's wife. I didn't care what they believed, only that they knew not to interfere. He was sitting in the parlor, rocking back and forth, clutching a pistol, eyes wild, face pale, skin slick with sweat. He saw me and tried to speak, but no words came. His lips trembled. I stood in front of him, calm still. "You should have listened when I said no," I whispered. He raised the pistol with a shaking hand. I didn't move. The barrel pointed straight at my chest, but he couldn't pull the trigger. His hand froze, his body locked up. I walked forward, placed my hand over the gun and slowly pushed it down. His eyes followed my hand, horrified. "You fed on pain, drank from fear, laughed at cries," I said. His eyes rolled back, his body convulsed, and then he was gone, not dead, not asleep, empty. Lifeless eyes blinked slowly, like a puppet without a soul. I left him like that, sitting in the chair, breathing, blinking, silent, forever imprisoned in a shell of flesh, his mind lost to the ether. That was justice. Not the kind handed down by courts, not the kind begged for in prayer, the kind you make. In the days that followed, the estate crumbled. Without the master, chaos took hold. His wife disappeared in the night, never to be seen again. Some say she fled. Others say she walked into the swamp and never came out. The land was cursed now, or so they said. Fields refused to yield. Tools broke. Animals turned violent. No one stayed long. I stayed for a time. Not to haunt, not to gloat, to reclaim. I turned the house into a sanctuary. Not of revenge, but of remembrance. Those who had suffered, those who had vanished without names, without graves. I honored them. I sang their songs. I told their stories. And when it was time, I left. I walked barefoot into the dawn, heading south toward the waters, carrying nothing but a bundle of herbs and a pouch of earth from the grave of my daughter. I never spoke my name again. Not to strangers, not to friends. That name belonged to the girl who was taken. I was someone else now, someone free. If you've listened this far, I thank you. Not just for hearing my story, but for keeping it alive. For every voice that was silenced, for every spirit that still lingers. May this tale be a light in the darkness. Not all revenge looks like fire. Sometimes it looks like silence, like a field left barren, like a name whispered in the wind. And sometimes justice walks away, not in chains but in power.